And the next keynote speaker is well known in this community because he was responsible, or he made the IANA transition happen. It is Larry Strickling, former assistant for the communication and information for the NTIA of the US department. Larry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, everybody stand up. I know you had a late evening, but we've got to get some energy in this room. You should have thought about that last night when you stayed out till midnight. Okay, have a seat. But let's get to work. Because I'm here today, I come before you today to deliver a call of action to each and every one of you. A call of action that each of you commit to get personally involved in a multi-stakeholder effort to address key internet policy issues, to find consensus approaches to dealing with the issues, and to implement those solutions. Now, is that too much to ask at 9 o'clock this morning? I don't think it is. But to do this, you're going to need some help. And I'm going to provide some help right now to those of you perplexed and confused by the multi-stakeholder process. First, we need a shared understanding of what is the multi-stakeholder process, and we need a shared understanding of what it is not. Now, there is no single model of the multi-stakeholder process, but for purposes of this discussion, let's focus on the key attributes that define an authentic multi-stakeholder process. One, it must be stakeholder-driven in that stakeholders determine the process and scope and direction of work. Two, it must be open and inclusive, both in terms of allowing broad participation and in ensuring that all issues are addressed. Three, the process must be transparent and accountable to all stakeholders and to the public. And four, outcomes must be consensus-based, delivering positive value to the greatest number of stakeholders. Now, a multi-stakeholder process that exhibits all of these attributes is most likely to be one that will be accepted as legitimate by the stakeholders and the public. Just as important as what is a multi-stakeholder process is understanding what it is not. And one, it is not an ism. The multi-stakeholder process is simply a set of tools to help people collaborate to solve problems. It is not a philosophy or a political ideology, and we do the process a disservice to refer to it as an ism because it encourages people to argue about it and take sides about what should be a set of tools that can provide and help everyone. Secondly, beware of those who haphazardly or even manipulatively attach the label multi-stakeholder to what in fact are multilateral or top-down processes. When a government or a business runs a consultation that is open to input from all stakeholders but keeps the decision-making to itself, it in no way is running a true multi-stakeholder process. And we find that rarely do such efforts even allow for collaboration among the stakeholders, much less decision-making by them. So, having described what is a multi-stakeholder process and what it is not, let me turn to my second point, which is that people are reluctant or afraid to take the initiative to establish multi-stakeholder processes. Part of that fear stems from people not knowing how to organize and manage a multi-stakeholder process, and that can be easily overcome. The Internet Society's Collaborative Governance Initiative is developing training materials on how to run multi-stakeholder processes, and there are already lots of instructional materials available. We in the Internet community may like to think that the multi-stakeholder process was born with the Internet, but that's simply not the case. Collaboration and consensus-building techniques have been around for decades, and there are many instructional guides and manuals available worldwide to anyone who needs some help. But trust me when I tell you that of the keys to successful multi-stakeholder process, they mostly reflect simple common sense and basic stakeholder management principles. It's not rocket science, and it is easy to learn. Another part of the fear and reluctance to bring forward multi-stakeholder processes stems from the sense that the problems today are so large that protecting privacy, battling cybersecurity threats, and the like, these are so large that people are intimidated about trying to organize a response. Also, there's a predisposition to want comprehensive, enforceable solutions to these problems, which usually translates into waiting for government or some other organization to take the initiative. I urge you not to let that fear deter you from taking action. The existing government processes to enact comprehensive legislation or write regulations or negotiate treaties are not well equipped to deal with the fast-changing issues of the internet. These processes are slow, they usually don't result in any outcome, and even when they do, the problem that they intended to address often no longer exists. And if they get it wrong, it's incredibly difficult to undo bad legislation or regulation. Instead, I encourage each of you to think about how to address internet policy challenges in smaller bits. Can you define a piece of the issue in a way that a group of stakeholders in your own country or region could address the topic, find a consensus solution, and then have stakeholders implement it? We need to encourage experimentation around the world. We need to encourage finding ways to make incremental progress on issues by solving parts of the problem and then building on the small successes through iterations of the process over time. You will need to be creative. You will have to focus on elements of these issues whose solutions are within the power of the participating stakeholders to implement. And let me say that implementation is key. Too often participants in multi-stakeholder processes claim success when they reach consensus on the solution, but then they fail to address who's going to implement the solution and how it will be implemented. You must focus right from the start to define the problem to be solved in a way that allows the parties to the process to implement any consensus outcome. As an example of what I mean, take the issue of disinformation or fake news online. Some of the responses being discussed involve creating comprehensive regulatory frameworks for deciding what is disinformation and what to do about it. Absent a government convening the multi-stakeholder process to create such a framework, there is little use to having you organize your own process to develop such a scheme. You have no authority or ability to implement the framework, and because of that fact, you would have a hard time sustaining such a discussion for any length of time. But that doesn't mean it's an issue you should stay away from. You can make a contribution to solving the problem. What if you convened a multi-stakeholder process to develop and implement an educational program on media literacy? You could certainly identify a set of stakeholders who would have the ability and incentive to design and deliver such a program. Now, none of you can do this by yourself. You need to work together with others in your community. You need to recruit stakeholders who will represent all of the key views that have to be addressed. But it takes a catalyst, someone who steps forward and takes that lead to initiate the discussion. And each and every one of you can play that role as a catalyst. No matter how narrow the issue you take up or how limited the geographical extent of the discussion, every successful multi-stakeholder decision that is implemented provides input into new norms for answering the challenges before us. Over time, they will combine and compound into broad solutions, and if and when governments decide to legislate a comprehensive enforceable approach, they will be guided by the aggregation of these individual solutions. Commentators refer to the internet as having allowed permissionless innovation, the idea that allowing experimentation with new technologies without requiring government or competitor approval. What I'm urging all of you today is to engage in permissionless problem solving. If we all make it our responsibility, perhaps we can spur the next great leap forward for the internet to better recognize and respect human rights, to better deter cybercrime and cyber attacks, and to better meet the needs of citizens around the world. And all I ask is that you give it a try. So please do it. and I thank you for listening to me this morning.
Thank you very much. And before I even could ask if there is a question over there. Renaya.
Good morning, Larry. Renalia Abdurrahim, Internet Community. I know you're not responsible for the NTIA anymore.
That's true.
But I am interested in your insight regarding a recent course of action from the NTIA, which is to issue a notice of inquiry that poses certain questions about the state of Internet policy. It's like a public comment, essentially. And one of the things that it's asking for is about the effectiveness of the multi-stakeholder approach. And under that set of questions is a question about rewinding the IANA stewardship transition. And I got a little bit upset about that because the global internet community spent 2 years working on that, and my understanding is that it was a consensus effort. And I would be interested to know your insights on what would be motivating that from the NTIA, whether that is a signal for the US government to withdraw from being a collaborative actor and supporter of the multi-stakeholder approach. Thank you.
So I don't have any insight into what's going on inside NTIA right now, but on your question, the IANA transition cannot be unwound. It's happened, it's done and over, and there is no feasible scenario I can devise that would allow the US government to anyway go back on that. I understand if you read the newspaper that there may be certain people in Washington who disagreed with the transition going forward and may still be hanging on to that opposition now almost, 2 years after the fact. I think you have nothing to worry about in that regard. The idea of issuing a notice of inquiry is quite common in government agencies in Washington. It helps set the agenda for the agency based on the comments they get. So I wouldn't read anything in particular to the idea that they're asking about the multi-stakeholder process generally. And I think if anyone is so motivated, I would encourage them to respond to the notice with a set of comments that very robustly defends the multi-stakeholder model and very much reaffirms what I just said, which is that the IANA transition is a fait accompli and can't be unwound and would be incredibly unwise to even try.
Thank you. That was a very clear answer. Any other questions? Please.
Hi. Thank you for your kind words on the multi-stakeholders. I just have really another straightforward question. You mentioned we need to take action and we need to step up, but I want to ask you about how difficult would it be to motivate the society itself to embrace these kind of multi-stakeholder approaches, especially in less privileged countries where even the way of regulating is even through dictatorship, and the society itself is really used to that approach. Thank you.
Well, it's not going to be easy. What we need are missionaries. I'm trying to recruit a room full of missionaries here this morning. But each person I can convince to take a step forward and take initiative, and hopefully that person can convince another 10, 20, 100 people to do the same. That's how we eventually get change accomplished in this world. And I think the challenge we face is that it's got to be done in small steps. The idea that it's somehow going to be done universally, that somebody's going to magically appear and dictate that this is the way we go forward, it's not going to happen. It's only going to happen by each of you as part of this movement to take it upon yourself to find opportunities, to find stakeholders, to just work and figure out what can we solve, what's within our power and our competence to make advances in, and do it. And then you've now set an example for everyone else. And we need to have things like EuroDiG where those successes can be celebrated and broadcast to everyone so that more and more people pick this up. But it's not going to be easy, but it starts with each of you deciding that you want to be an agent of change and that you're going to take some responsibility to be that catalyst. Michael.
Thank you, Larry. My name is Michael Ogia. You're absolutely right when you say that the internet community was not the first to pioneer multi-stakeholder methods. And so I guess my question is really about, has there been any kind of concerted effort to connect with communities outside of the internet space, particularly the community of mediators and facilitators around the world, such as mediators beyond borders, etc. And other groups like that that actually have made multi-stakeholder dialogue a science?
And the answer is not enough, but it's one of the things that we're committed to doing at the Internet Society through the Collaborative Governance Project. So, to your point about drawing on the knowledge of mediation and facilitation, there's a lot of work that's been done in that space on facilitating multi-party negotiations. That is basically a multi-stakeholder discussion. And so in crafting the training materials that we're going to be rolling out starting in July, in fact, we're going to be utilizing the European Summer School of Internet Governance and the students there as some of our first set of experimentees to present the training to them. We're developing that in consultation with the Consensus Building Institute, which is made up of people who do arbitrations and facilitations and mediations. So we're going to have the benefit of all of that learning in the training program that we're putting together. The other thing you find is that in this business, we refer to this as a multi-stakeholder process. You will find that there are probably a dozen terms to describe these same techniques. You've got collaborative governance, which is actually the term we've adopted for this initiative at the Internet Society. Direct democracy is another term. And you have academics around the world who have been thinking about these issues in the context of land use planning or nanotechnology or healthcare. And we are also, as part of this project, figuring out how we bring all of those people together in a network to help design a research agenda for this going forward.
That's great to hear, and I'm glad you're working with CBI.
Yeah.
I see we have a question
Tatiana?
from a remote
No, not
participant.
Microphone?
Microphone for the remote moderator, please.
Thank you. We have a question from a remote participant. Her name is Amalie de Silva Mitchell. And the question is, how should we include the emerging AI technologies to the current framework of ICTs for IGF? Thank you.
That's for another session, I think.
There will be a session on artificial intelligence later that evening, not evening, that day, and Renalia in the room is responsible for that. Maybe you keep that in mind and try to answer this. Take note of it, please.
Anything else? Great. Well, I expect to see you all. I look forward to hearing of all of the great processes that you all find ways to initiate. Let's get started on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry.